Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Blame It on Marketing. And this week's episode, we are going to be talking about podcasts because who doesn't love a podcast episode about podcasts? It's not a chance for Ruta and I to just talk about ourselves. We've invited another podcasting expert along for the ride. So, Nina, over to you. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you, Ruta, for having me. I'm thrilled, and I just said it. I'm rarely ever on the other side of the microphone, usually leading the interview. So this is a very exciting moment for me to be here, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. So my name is Nina Müller. I'm the director of the Ethical Commerce Alliance and Industry Network, dedicated to raising ethical standards in e-commerce, bringing together ethical tech makers, brands, and retailers to share knowledge and discuss and find ways of these new challenges focusing around privacy and data protection issues, especially in relation to AI, but not only because the privacy and data protection problem has been there before, of course.
Wonderful. Me and Emma discussed this episode, I think ages ago. We started planning it, and I was really curious to just dig in and see if there's any good podcast stats that we could find. And what we found, I was quite surprised at. So we had a look at some Reddit stuff and some other sources. I'll pop the links down below. But essentially, I don't know if you know this, but 90% of podcasts don't get past episode 2.
Oh, really? I did not know
Really?
that. Oh, that's a
Yeah.
shame.
And uh, essentially, if you want to be in the top 1% of podcasts, you need to make 21 episodes in terms of actually producing them. So I thought the numbers would be very different from this personally, but also I've filmed several podcasts that have never went live, so I can kind of understand it. But I guess from our side, um, when we're talking to our customers, sometimes we'll suggest having a podcast, and that's the right thing to do. But do you think, all B2B businesses should be aiming to have a successful podcast? Or what's your thoughts on that?
I mean, given the numbers, my,
No.
I'm leaning towards no. Um, maybe it doesn't make sense for everybody to have a podcast, but really you should be clear on what do you want to use it for? What do you want to say? Is this the right format for the content that you want to produce? And then again, circling back to the stats, no more than 2 podcasts have been produced of a lot of them, not more than 2 episodes. If you don't have content for more than 2 episodes, you should maybe think about this before. So the podcast is a great tool of creating content for a longer period of time. And if you have lots to talk about and to share and to offer this to your audience for a very easy way of consumption, I think this is also why they are so popular, because people can listen to this on the go. They don't have to sit down and read. They can, for once, shut down their screens, give their eyes some rest, and do something and strain the ears a little more, depending who's talking and what they're talking about. If you have that, and if you're very clear on that, I think it can be a great opportunity and a great way of creating content and sharing your thoughts, ideas, and use it as a great marketing tool to promote your product and your company.
One of the things that comes to mind from my side is maybe about where you are in terms of your marketing maturity when you take on something like a podcast, because it is that long standing commitment. Like, for example, if you're still in like lead gen phase and you're like, all we need to do is generate leads because that's where we are as a business, and there's nothing wrong with that, just, because I know there's a lot of talk about that. If you're in that phase, a podcast probably isn't the right mechanism for you, because lead gen and podcasts don't necessarily go hand in hand. But if you are a little bit more, if your marketing function is a bit more mature and you're doing things like talking about demand gen principles and account based marketing and all of those kind of things, a podcast might be the right thing for you. I don't know what you guys think about that as a way of maybe being your kind of like barometer for whether to have one or not.
I think there's something there, but also, you know what? on the flip side, what I've seen work really well, I've seen a podcast work really well as like the anchor point for any content that you might be doing. So, for example, you're a small marketing team, you've just started doing content, your podcast is almost like your long form, your kind of interview with the CEOs, and then from there you can spin off a whole bunch of other content, and it works as like an easy way to create something quite meaty. So I've seen it work that way too, but it still requires, I guess, a level of dedication and commitment to doing something like that, which might not be the right choice for the moment, especially if, again, if you're heavy in lead gen and content and kind of customer education isn't as important. So yeah, both yes and no.
And I wanted to say the same thing, that it can be a great way to start spreading the word and using this as an easy tool. But again, this more for planning in the, your content a long way ahead. Also because each podcast, even though it sounds like people just chatting away, and some do, but I think a good podcast requires some preparation.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that in mind, what do you think some of the mistakes are that people make when it comes to launching and running one?
Again, think about if the podcast is the right format for you. Do you want to speak about this? Do you have guests that you want to interview, or do you just have one episode with, taking Ruta's example, the CEO to interview? Then do I have the technical setup? I mean, this is a fairly easy one because everybody can do a podcast. It's I think one of the crucial factors is to know your audience. Who are you speaking to? Not as the interview guest, but really, what is the content that you want to share, and why do you want to share it? Why do you think it bears relevance for your audience? Is there something new to learn, or is it a challenge that many in your audience are facing, or is it just something entertaining that you want to do? Do you want to be educational? Do you want to do a business podcast? And so this is that you need to be clear on, and then find your plot or your theme that leads you through every episode, despite the fact if you're making like series, or like you do, or like I do, I have a monthly podcast.
I was going to say, one of the things that I've seen, like a kind of, I think, Nina, you're right on all of those fronts, by the way. They're all like tick, tick, tick on your checklist if you're taking notes during this. But I would also say, do your research about the other podcasts in your sector or your industry that are either really popular or that are really good content wise. They don't have to necessarily be really popular because they might be super niche. And think about, your naming convention. And I think, think about the whole thing as kind of its own, it's a marketing brand activity. And so, it's not like you can't change the name of your podcast halfway through doing it if something better comes along. But as we know, it's the same as like naming your company, right? It's like that is going to make life tricky if you then halfway through things decide to change the name. And I have seen people not do that. And then they've got competing podcasts that are about something completely different, but with the same name. And it is really hard to find something with a unique name, but it is doable. So you might have to slightly veer off from maybe your original thought, but I think that's really important, because when it comes to the listings in all of the streaming sites, that's, you're going to be searching and you're not going to come up top otherwise.
It needs to be informative, yet standing out from the rest, from everybody, what everybody else is doing. It's a bit like squaring the circle. I really like Blame It on Marketing, by the way, because it tells people what it is about, marketing. But at the same time, you're playing with this, like you're taking up the challenge, if that is really true. So it already creates a sort of expectation from the audience. At least this is how I feel about it. And this makes me curious and wonder, like, oh, what are they talking about?
Yeah, we definitely have some drama to do with Blame It on Marketing, the name, in terms of other people claiming that it's theirs when it isn't. But I'm not going to get into that too
Oh,
much.
really?
Yes.
Yeah. We might find ourselves with a lawsuit otherwise.
Yeah. Early on, somebody was quite aggressively asking us to take it down, even though we put our podcast up first. So the only advice I have for that is make sure that if you're serious, also grab like the other social handles and maybe the domain name that
Yes,
you want, just to protect
definitely.
yourself. Because yeah, that happens. Maybe one day we'll tell the story of what happened once it's all finished. Not that anything is particularly going on, but things are still a little in the air, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, but also for another reason, you don't want to be named like anyone else and then always be mixed up with them.
One other thing that I wanted to discuss in terms of mistakes can we avoid, or what mistakes get made, is something that I've noticed, and Emma and I have again spoken about it, is the fact that it's the two of us doing it brings about so much accountability. So obviously it's just me and Emma as individuals, not like within a company sense, but just creating some accountability around your podcast, because I feel like because it doesn't necessarily have like immediate return results, you can deprioritize it in your work when you're planning to do episodes, or stuff is busy. So having some sort of accountability, whether it's you and another person on the team working on it, or maybe it's you commit to saying, we're always going to post on this day of this week on the month, so that people are expecting it, and you kind of have that accountability and kind of drive to make sure that it's out there, because yeah, it's something that can get, I think, deprioritized quite easily sometimes.
Yes, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, because it's a recording, you can plan it when it is convenient for you. And to me, preparing some new content and an interview comes by pretty quickly, because what I like to do is talking to my new guest, have a preparation chat with them, learning more about them, and just find out about what they feel comfortable in talking about and what they don't. Starting to draft topics, questions from there. Um, Sometimes I'm like, what do I ask? And then I get really stuck. It's a creative process, and then I need to go out, or I need to leave it for the next day. And then the next morning I can start fresh, and then I can write for half an hour, and boom, it's done. And I'm so happy with the questions. And then, yeah, there you go. But yeah, it takes some time. But the easy way is that you can build it in whenever it suits you.
And along that thread, Nina, along the sort of like resources and time and effort and expertise that you're required to actually produce and pull a podcast together, what are some of those things? Because I think quite often, and you do hear this, it's sort of like sometimes becomes like the flavor of the month. Like a lot of marketers will just have their CEO come to them and go, I think we should do a podcast. And you're like, wonderful. And there's no real understanding about the time, effort, and energy it takes to actually produce one. So I'd love to hear from your side, like what was that like for you, and how intense is that when you're producing yours?
Huh. Yeah, that's a good question, because when I started this, I was a bit thrown into this when I joined Empathy as a company. They had a podcast, an infrequent one, and had recorded, I don't know, 5 or 6 or so episodes. And then when I started to create DCA, when we started building this up and setting goals and what can be our vision, and like really get the ball rolling, a colleague from marketing came to me and said, like, okay, we have this podcast. It's working great, but none of us really has time to be the owner of this. With the ECA, wouldn't that be a great opportunity? I said, a podcast actually is a great opportunity. Okay, here you go. You do it. And was like, oh God, I have no experience in podcasting whatsoever. Okay, what do I do? So I got help, like all the technical bits that I didn't know about. My colleague was there to help me with the editing, and also with uploading it, and like getting it ready for publication. And then he showed me the software, how to do it, and this is it. This was it. And then my part was really to focus on the content. What is it that we want to talk about, and what is it that is useful to the audience? In what way can we do this? I opted for interview style, and like I said, a monthly interview with the guests, and the topic of data ethics and digital ethics and privacy.
I think I picked up on something that's really crucial as well in terms of what it takes to produce a podcast. I think enjoying the topic and being passionate about the thing you're talking about is going to go a really, really, really long way. I know, I know me and Emma literally started this because we're like, we just want to chat about stuff with somebody. And like, we do it because we love making every single episode. It's not because it's this whole grand scheme of stuff. Yeah, we've got stuff going on, but like, the primary thing is we enjoy doing the podcast. And I think if we ever got to a point where we really didn't enjoy doing it, we probably would stop, because it wouldn't be the same, I don't think.
I think the one I think that's it. I think we've never sat down and recorded an episode and felt like it's a chore, and I think at that point you probably know it's done, I'm like, will we ever cover every single topic that people blame marketing for? Probably not, because there'll always be new stuff. So we're good on that front, I think.
Yeah.
But I think we once, when we're kind of in recording mode, we once sort of roughly tallied up how many hours we think we spend a week working on Blame It on Marketing. And it is about 8 hours between the two of us, if not sometimes more, depending on, what we've got going on, if we're doing promo, if we're on someone else's podcast promoting it, all of that kind of stuff. So it is, if you think about that, it's a day a week of work, and it will probably only get, well, I mean, maybe some of the tools will get better and it will speed some things up, but in terms of promotional activity and actually marketing the podcast itself, like that is, as everybody knows who's listening, who's a marketer, is going, yeah, we know. It's the day job, we all know. So it is that level of commitment. So it's not just about recording and editing and the guests, all of that stuff takes time. It's all the other stuff that you sort of, maybe forget about or kind of leave to the last minute, that adds up. So yeah, I would just say get organized.
Get organized, yeah.
Yeah, but
again,
I think
it's really nice to.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say again, it's really nice to have two people doing it, because if I'm not feeling like doing something or I'm mega busy or something, you've got someone else to rely on. Or Emma's very good with all the people stuff and booking people in and all of that stuff, and I do all the like recording bits and editing and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's nice to have a partner in crime when you do it.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. But I have really nice colleagues who help me, like again, with the editing and the uploading. So I'm focused on the recording and the content, and this is what I'm best at, and well, better than the technical bits anyway, and I enjoy most.
Yeah, absolutely. So if there's some marketers watching this, maybe they want to have their own podcast and kind of blame it on marketing style, or they want to start creating a podcast for the business that they're in. What are some of the kind of beginner steps and things that you would recommend to look at? So we kind of covered a little bit of it in one of the questions before, but kind of where would you start?
I would start listening to podcasts really as a pre-step before I go into action and start, just doing things, because there are so many different formats. It's not just, doing interviews. Secondly, maybe do some trials with colleagues, with friends, episodes that are not meant for publication, but just to get an idea of these are the questions that I can ask, like pick a topic and then go back and listen to it. And this is like the hardest part, I think, to listen to yourself. I hate it to this day. But yeah, it's getting better. You get used to it, and then think of like what can be done better. Is the audio quality a good one, or which software do you pick where you can find information? What setup do you really need? And then build a time frame. When you say 8 hours per episode, and at the beginning you probably need longer. You need more preparation time because you're not so maybe the questions don't come so easy for you. You want to do more research on the interview guests that you have, and you don't feel as comfortable, so you need also more time for editing, things like that. So to prepare a little more time for the release of the first episode, and then put yourself under pressure, because that would, I think, take away a lot of the fun. that can be found in here?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that. And then the only other thing I'd add is just make sure you've got that plan mapped out about how you're going to promote it, what channels. For example, lots of people start off doing just audio podcasts and then they want to move to doing video and audio. So maybe have a little think about that, whether you want video and audio. It's worth maybe capturing both, even if you're not going to use the video straight away, because you might well want to come back and do that at some point. So I think just plot some of those things out as well. And yeah, the promotional side of it. It's unlikely with a new podcast that people will find it just by searching in Spotify or Apple or whatever. So just think about the ways that you're going to do that and the way you're going to and when it's appropriate to as well, versus what else you've got going on marketing wise, because the podcast bit's really fun. But you do also want people to tune in as well. When we do these episodes, Nina, we always get to sort of like this point where we sort of say to people, is there anything that we should have asked you about podcasting that we haven't?
Now you got me. I don't know. I don't think we have. I can't think of anything, or I can't think of anything better that I haven't shared. I would like to know from you, which one is your favorite podcast?
Favorite podcast? Interesting. Our favorite like podcast in terms of broadly speaking, or like episode?
Both is fine. If you have a favorite episode, then that one, but doesn't need to be necessarily like your all-time favorite podcast that you can't miss any episode of.
I'll be honest, I listen to really trashy podcasts. So there are some drag queens that I love that do podcasts, and I listen to them religiously. But that's obviously a very niche area of podcasts. But in terms of, I'll be honest, I don't tend to listen to like other marketing podcasts, which I'm probably going to get assassinated for. Probably, but it's only because I think I have yet to find one that strikes a balance between it feeling like it's too much about the actual day-to-day work and the comedy and lightness. And so I very often listen to specific episodes from people on specific topics, but not like a whole series on something. So yeah, so that's me. And then in terms of like our podcast, I think my favorite episodes have always been the ones where we've talked about how to like improve the working lives of marketers. To be honest, they've always been the ones that have been the most fun to do, because you can really get into what the challenges for people really are. What about you, Nina?
I have to say, well, Masters of Prosy, obviously, because I've been a guest on the newsroom episode from Sergio Maldonado. He is the CEO of Privacy Cloud. He's doing regular podcast episodes with lots of interesting guests, mostly focusing on the legal bits. And Sergio is very knowledgeable, and I really like, and he's always super fast in publishing them. I envy him a bit for this. That he's like just like that, or so it seems. I know that there is a lot of work. I recently discovered, I don't think he's doing new episodes, or I don't know, David Tennant does a podcast, and this is what it's called. And he always has actors and actresses as guests, and it's always such a cheerful, relaxed atmosphere, because he's an actor and he's not a journalist or anything, and he's not asking them about a new film, but like a really generalized approach. And my favorite episode is obviously the one with Neil Gaiman. Huge fan of Good Omens and of everything that Neil Gaiman does.
So I make myself really sick with podcasts. I like to binge listen to a podcast like in one go. So I'll go for like 2 weeks and I'll listen to basically almost every episode of any podcast. So I've gone through like Rev Genius, or even if it's like the good old original Ricky Gervais podcast with Carl and Steve Merchant. Those were incredible. Like whatever topic it is that I'm dealing with, but I will make myself really sick of it. So, and then I'll just move on to the next podcast, and then sometimes I go back. But that's my listening style. So yeah, that's kind of how it works for me. In terms of my favorite episode of Blame It on Marketing, God, that's really hard. Any that are fun. Oh, you know what? I'll say Marketing Triggers is probably my favorite episode. It's the one where me and Emma basically tried to trigger each other with marketing like problems, and we were drinking at the same time. It was great. That I'll say that's my favorite episode. Just
Oh,
because
I
it was
have
so
to
much
listen
fun.
to this now.
Yeah. It's
Great.
really fun.
Typical me, I'm always curious to ask questions. Do you have a podcast favorite guest that you would like to, a person that you would really like to interview?
Ruta's just texted me because Ruta and I have been talking about the Kardashians, and I do love Kris Jenner, because I think there is just something very strangely, mysteriously powerful about that woman, and she's clearly some sort of marketing expert underneath it all as well. So maybe there you go. Thanks, Ruta. I've stolen, I don't know whether you were going to say it, but thanks for reminding me that I would say Kris Jenner.
A super film enthusiast and about films and movies. So I would like to have a famous actor or actress on my podcast and ask them about privacy, because they have so little of them and what it means to be online. So just to shed some light on it. What it means to have little privacy left when so many people say like, oh yeah, I can accept all cookies, I've got nothing to hide, which becomes a whole different story when you cannot even have your own Twitter account or X without like in your own private world, or when you have to fear that your Amazon account with your clear name is being spied upon or is being looked at by and maybe not being treated confidentially. Because you're a person in the limelight. I mean, this is what you're buying in for. Okay, this is part of the job, but and how far does it affect you? Does it get to you, or do you just work your way around it? So I think this is something very interesting that I'd be. At the same time, I'm very aware, like talking publicly about it. I don't know who'd be willing to do this, but that would be a very interesting question that I'd be really happy to talk about.
So what we would like to say is that if Kris Jenner or any famous celebrities are listening, we'd really like you to come on Blame It on Marketing or on Nina's podcast and talk about privacy, because it'll be very interesting. So that's how we'll end things. Thanks so much for joining us, Nina. And for everybody listening, if you would like to join the Blame It on Marketing community, go to blameitonmarketing.com. And it is a safe space where you can say and ask questions about marketing with no fear that your boss is looking. So, and hopefully Nina will join us in there as well. So if you've got any questions about podcasting, pop on and ask away. Thanks, everyone.